Like many of you in the audience, if you've needed cash or credit at a certain time, you've struggled to get it. I certainly did when I came here. What is the typical situation you see? Well, you see from a bank's perspective, currently you would see two different people. Here's an example of two waiters. They look the same, their age is the same, their income level is the same. This is what a bank looks at someone who comes to them and asks them some credit. They have the same commute to work. So when they look at these two people, this is about all the information they have on them. And they typically would deny both of them. And that was the basic premise behind what we found, not just in the Philippines, but across the world. By using technology and big data, it's possible to credit rate people that have never been able to be credit rated before. But how big is this problem? We believe it's big. It started out as some employees couldn't get money in the bank, so they went to their employer and said, could I take a loan? When we looked at it, it's huge. Every country in the world, especially in the developing countries, faces a similar problem. It really starts with the product vision, and I think that on the dev teams, tech teams, you feel part of the product vision. You're integrated in it. Whether you're an outsourcing company working with a client, try and get closer to understand what they're doing.
So service-oriented architecture is the concept of using a service or a set of services to perform the primary parts of your business. And the way that we use it is we implement a set of REST services, pretty standard API, a way of implementing an API. We also introduced lightweight clients into it. So in your typical development cycle or typical web application, you have sort of some code written in a framework, like PHP framework or Ruby on Rails, accessing a database. We actually had 3 or 4 websites, all accessing the same database directly. And we're also looking at how do we move forward, how do we allow ourselves to move into mobile, how do we give other people access to our data. So we started looking into service-oriented architecture and building lightweight clients. So typically, like I said, you have a web application that accesses the database directly. We wanted to sort of look at different ways to extricate ourselves from that situation. What we ended up doing was building the very first set of services for Lenddo. The process of logging in. Typically, a member would come to your site, they would log in, you would put their username and password in, and then your website would check the database, see if that person existed, and then return a yes or no. What we did was we implemented a service for that. And it's just simply, instead of accessing a database directly, we send an encrypted copy of your username and password to the service. The service says yes or no. The website doesn't care how that user was authenticated. They just know yes or no. Our websites now don't run any database. We're just a thin client for our service. So we implemented first the product service, then the member service, to sort of extricate ourselves from our spaghetti code and start working on it internally. We made some huge improvements over the last year, and we're actually been implementing more and more clients and more services. In fact, I don't think that we would be where we are today from a mobile standpoint without those services. One of the great things about moving to service-oriented architecture is that all of our services can be scaled independently of each other.
Instant access to resources. So consider this. The data science team in New York needs like 20 servers. So we need to do MapReduce operations, we need to do some data crunching, and we need it to do in a matter of minutes. So if you're using the traditional model, so you have to procure 20 servers. And how long will that take? Do you think? It will take about 3 months. So after 3 months, you get 20 servers, and then you run it, and then afterwards, you're going to think, what am I going to do with the 20 servers? And how much does it cost? In cloud computing, that's not a big problem. So we'll just fire up 20 servers, let data science run it. Afterwards, data science says we don't even need this service anymore, so we just kill it, terminate it. So aside from this data science, the strength of using cloud computing is elasticity. We can scale up our servers from like 5 to 50 in a couple of minutes, and then scale that back down. Aside from that, we can run many of our databases in the cloud the app servers code, so on and so forth. And lastly, since we're a startup company and things go really fast, we have like products or features that needs to be done in a couple of weeks or by next week. So we need to have instant access to resources. And aside from just the resources that we need to have at least services, okay, that are really available or easily available, okay, that we can use in a matter of seconds. It's already been there. So one of the considerations also why we're using cloud computing models, especially AWS, is because of the wide range of available services. Since day one till now, using cloud for us works. Since we're limited in resources, especially in financial resources, what we did is, since we are now using the cloud, we can now allocate, or we can now devote those limited financial resources to more important aspects of the business of how Lenddo goes.
Alright, so what is mobile first? Mobile first isn't a particularly accurate way of describing it. For me, actually, mobile first is taking into consideration all the devices that your users are going to use, be it smartphones, tablets, personal computers, and stuff like that. And then designing around those. So this involves like activities like responsive design and other things like that. So why mobile first? First, let's start with in the Philippines. So we have the fastest smartphone growth in Asia. We have around 15 million smartphone users and rising, although it's still relatively low compared to our neighbors. But it is something that's that has starting to get important. And 7 out of 10 smartphones are running Android. The next one is iOS. Mobile also presents new opportunities. So we have stuff like push notifications. We have to take into consideration that mobile devices are always on and personal. Location services, convenience. Like you only need to log in once. So if you have a website, you find that you have to log in multiple times. Easy to submit data if you have access to the camera, access to contacts, and stuff like that. 6 months ago, we decided to go to mobile first strategy. Outsourcing is good if you want to get off fast. However, if you want to have a long-term strategy, it's best to have a in-house development since it's easier to collaborate and it's easier to get to know the business model and stuff like that. One of these days, like if your company plans to build native apps or start going to mobile, you have to figure out like what devices, what platforms you want to target. So for Lenddo, we chose to go with Android and iOS. So we have an Android app out right now. We have an iOS app in the works. And also responsive web design for everything else, like for tablets or for laptops. This is a very important decision since engineering and QA effort increases as you support more platforms. You have to learn each SDK. Like for Android, you use Java. For iOS, you use Objective-C, and then they have a new one out right now, Swift. For Windows Phone, you have to learn new stuff. So you have to pick the platforms that you want to support, and also depending on your budget. There are also tools that you can use that claims that you can deploy on all devices. But if you really want the highest quality apps, it's still best to go native. There's also another product called Ruby Motion, so it has support for Android and iOS. It's promising, but it's still too early. So here are other challenges, like on Android, you need to consider the different screen sizes, device types, and OS versions. Some OS versions have bugs that other versions don't. You also have to consider that native clients like Android and iOS are harder to change. So in the web, if you deploy, all users get the latest update. On Android and iOS, you have to wait a couple of days, even weeks to get an update out. So you really have to be careful. QA needs to be like, QA, this is a lot tougher. Alright, strategy. So this is what I learned in the process of implementing mobile. So first is delegate as much decision making and business logic to your service layer. The reason is it's easy to change your service layer. You don't have to roll out versions of your software to your users, because it takes time to download, and it's not even a guarantee if your users will actually download your app or updates your app. I recommend that you use REST and JSON responses for your service layer. Android and iOS have libraries that makes it easy to use, and of course it's small, it's simple, and since it's just HTTP, there are tools that you can use to debug it. On mobile, some people have data plans, and the size really matters when deploying those. Related to that is to optimize your network calls. The most important one is to use less calls. Do things like data compression, caching, like do on-device caching. If you only need to retrieve it once, then just retrieve it once. Don't repeatedly call to the server unless it's something that really needs to be updated. Also, it makes API calls simpler. The problem with Android and like even iOS is that it's very sensitive to, you can't make multiple network calls on the same thread as your UI, so you have to do callbacks and stuff like that. So it just makes it simpler. And I recommend that if you guys are planning on making an Android project, use Android Volley as your network library. It's very efficient, and it does all those network batching calls for you. Also, another tip is to allow for dynamic configuration within your app, which means try not to hard code as much stuff on your app as much as possible. So like in Lenddo, we have our loan application forms. Instead of hard coding the form itself inside the app, we have a service that actually tells how to render the form. That way, every time there's changes to the form, you don't have to do a big redeploy of the app. Another is designed for security. Remember that unlike server-to-server calls, mobile-to-server calls are less secure since you don't have control over what the client has. And most likely you're going to put your secret keys on the device. I mean, it's unavoidable. My tip is to create session tokens. So there's a specific session key for each user so that they can't access other resources. So the user actually has to log in first. Use obfuscation tools. So Android provides something like that called ProGuard.